So in the 80s, I basically turned down every job offer I got out of college, every grad school I got into, and I packed up a little Dodge Colt and I drove out here in 1984. Lived in the back of a cherry orchard. So Sunnyvale at that time was still, wasn't completely agrarian, but most of this area was orchards. And so the area that I lived is now a bunch of car dealerships and a shopping center. But it was kind of barren. And I came out here and I came out here to find the computer club, and I ended up joining a startup. That startup, which I think is, again, another one so old, no one will remember the name, it's called LSI Logic. And the funny thing that has come to light more frequently now, the other guy there were 3 or 4 people right out of college. There weren't many in that company, but one of the other ones was Chen Wang. So Chen was the product, he was the apps engineer for a graphics controller for a Sun workstation, and that became that one at TSMC. So I was there from May till October. The company's incorporated in November, so I didn't actually have. I had a badge of a company that didn't yet exist, but I still have the badge. I have a picture of the badge. But
I've seen that photo.
Yeah, it's fun. I have that.
Do you have a badge of the photo?
I have a picture. But anyway, so I went into venture capital in 1991. The startup that I had been with, because it had been started by the CEO of Fairchild, and Fairchild Semiconductor was the root of many companies. So there were 7 executives at Fairchild left to start Intel, National, AMD, TI. So not yet. There was a bunch of companies. Kleiner, Eugene Kleiner started Kleiner Perkins. Don Valentine was the VP of sales at one of the companies at National Semiconductor. The board of our startup was Tom Perkins, Don Valentine, and then the manager. And so the CEO, even though I was a technical person, he thought I had a personality for marketing, so I got stuck in marketing, and Will Corrigan told me that I had to meet this guy on the board because he was in sales, and that was Don Valentine. So I got a little bit of an education from Don, and when I went into venture capital, I basically tagged along, and I would just kind of follow around and do, co-invest. So I think one of the first investments I made, which blows my mind today, was a company called Microchip. And if you look it up today, I think the ticker is MCHP. The valuations in that era, like a big valuation for a company going public, like in that era, even Microsoft went public at a $400 million valuation. Traded at 900, but it was like $100 million. $100 million IPO market cap was big. And so I funded with him Microchip at a $3 million valuation. And I think it's $100 billion today. I think I stopped looking, but it's a big company. But that was it. So Don taught me a lot. He was the formative framework that I operate to.
So another one of the investments is often used for what we talked about earlier today, showing grit, determination, and getting through adversity. So we're Campbell. Can you tell us a little bit about that story? I heard she got turned down hundreds of times during the pitches.
This is one of those stories that is kind of like I saw her back in the fall, and I printed something. We printed something together on like a little bag envelope. I think it was something like "Truth is stranger than fiction," because it literally is a story you could not make up ever. So Melanie was a dropout from UWA. She was making high school yearbooks out of her mom's living room as a business, and on the side she was teaching classes on how to use Adobe. Because she was trying to use Adobe to shape these pages. And I went out to Perth, Australia, because I wanted a clipboard. So I did a windsurfer first, and that southern part of Australia on the west is just ultra famous for windsurfing because it's like waves, wind. Like I tell people that haven't been there, if you took California and you turn the brown sand white, and you turn the gray murky water turquoise blue, and raise the air temperature about 10 degrees, that's what it is. It's beautiful. It's just amazing. So I had always wanted to go there, and I had friends that had traveled all that way, but every time I was like, oh, it's so far, and I could just windsurf under the Golden Gate Bridge. So I never went. And there was a guy from Silicon Valley that married an Australian woman, moved to Perth, and he threw a little conference at a university where I'm a professor. It's like really far away, but I'm an adjunct professor in Perth. And so he was throwing this little commercialization thing called Univation. He had university projects from all over Australia, and he wanted somebody to come talk about venture capital. So he calls me up one day and says, hey, Bill, I got a deal for you. If you're willing to come out and do a 1-hour talk, I can get the university to cover your travel, and you go kite up and down the coast for a week. And I was like, really? Yeah, I got the budget. I said, I'm in. And then I look at the flight pattern. It's like 16 hours to Singapore, and a long 10-hour layover, another 6 hours to Perth. But I went. Okay, so I go out there, and somehow I met Melanie. And Melanie described to me her vision, right? And this would have been around 2010. In 2010, I had just made this big gear shift to investing in cloud and mobile. And I think right around that period, I seeded Tango, Voxer, Zoom, a little bit later. But it was basically that the infrastructure change I knew would change the cost structure of delivering applications over the web. And I hadn't thought of Adobe, and she described to me how she thought a product should look. And I think I had one other thing. Back in 1986, I did a consulting project for a company called CompuGraphic, which no one's ever heard of, but they were the world's leader in photo typesetting. So for newspapers, it used to be that you'd send the satellite data up into the air, it'd come down to a printer, and then it would set the little letters and things for the newspaper, and it would print. And that company had $500 million in cash. They could see the digital wave going, and they wanted to diversify. And I had one recommendation for them, which was to buy this startup for $30 million called Adobe. And they didn't do it, and they went bankrupt. So you look at it was owned by Agfa, but that division's gone. Anyway, so I just remembered that, and I was like, Adobe's worth $30 million. This was in 2010. And I was like, nobody 10 years from now is going to be buying $1,000 CD-ROM in a cardboard box and taking lessons. And I myself had Adobe Premiere and Photoshop, and they're really hard to use. And I was like, oh, Melanie, this is cool. Can you build this? And she said, no, I'm not technical. I said, well, tell you what, if you can find a good CTO or somebody who can build this, I might fund you. And so for the next 3 years, we spent a bunch of time meeting people, trying to get a CTO. And it just so happened that somebody else I had taught to kite, whose name is Lars Rasmussen. Lars was the creator of Google Maps. And Lars somehow had built Google Maps, Google Wave, and an enterprise business for Google out of Sydney, Australia. And so I was like, Lars probably has people. And so I text Lars. He happened to be, Melanie had come over. We were sitting in University Cafe on University Avenue. I text Lars, and he messaged me right back. We were having lunch, Melanie. So I text Lars, and Lars replied right away. I was like, because it's nighttime there. And he said, oh, I'm at the Four Seasons on University Avenue. I said, what? So he had just gotten poached by Mark Zuckerberg to redo search at Facebook. And so those two met, and then it took another 1.5 years to find Cameron Adams. But once we got Cameron, we had a complete team, and then a crowd of kiteboarders funded Canva, came up with a really cool strategy for a marketplace. John Sweeney, if you know John, helped put that up. Rick Baker was on that trip, who's he had been the fund of funds guy for National Australian Bank, funding venture funds, including mine. He had left to start a little fund. And I was like, hey, Rick, I can't fly to Australia for board meetings. I wrote him a check. He started he was starting Blackbird Ventures anyway, but I backed Blackbird Ventures, which then funded Canva. And Wesley Chen, I don't know if Wesley's still on it. Wesley was on our kite trip with Melanie too. So he ended up leading the Series A. And now Canva is, I think, a $2 billion run rate. It's been profitable for 6 years, probably about 70% gross margin, 26% operating profit, worth about $26 billion.
We use Canva to design that over.
How many of you use Canva, out of curiosity? How many people use Zoom? There we go. Yeah, awesome.
So leading into Zoom. No, I want to hear more about this. 3 years it took you to raise. Was it her?
Well, okay, you got a 20-something-year-old girl who didn't finish college in Perth, Australia, 40 hours away, who has no technical background that wants to take on Adobe, Microsoft, and Google. And everybody thought everybody thought she was nuts. And people thought I was nuts for backing her. They're like,
why did you back her then? It's really 3 years of working with her
and watching her learn to kiteboard.
Yeah.
So and I don't. How many people here have tried to kiteboard? Okay, so right? It's hard, and you literally are failing 99% of the time every time. When you're learning, it's like, how am I ever going to figure this out? So that doesn't seem ever possible. It's like just terrible, right? So there's a certain kind of person that will push through that and just keep going. And so you learn a lot about how somebody learns. Some people learn fast. Some people never learn. Some people make the same mistake over and over and over. And so you learn a lot about somebody's judgment, grit, tenacity, intelligence, from many things, but one of them is kiteboarding. And I learn a lot about people from just hanging out and seeing, I basically am looking for drive and good judgment. Integrity first, that's a given. But if they've got a lot of drive and they steer well, there's a chance. And then the market has to be right, this is what I learned from Don Valentine. You can have the greatest team in the world and infinite money behind them. You pick the wrong market, you will lose money every single time. So I'm always looking for, what is the structural change? What's the timing like? Can I put a rider on the water and give them a good surfboard? And if I feel like it all lines up, then there's a chance, and then I also have to have like a support network, because you can't do it by yourself. So when I do seeds, people that have invested with me I tend to put together a lot of interesting people for small amounts, because I'd rather have more people cheering per dollar than like one investor that dominates everything. So all of the things lined up, and it took 3 years because she was an unknown from Perth to get that like gel and critical mass and people to believe. And then finally, when I felt like, okay, I think if I pull the trigger now, it's going to go. Because there's always timing in that too, because you want to push a ball and have it roll downhill, not push, So you got, there's kind of like I tell people when they're raising money, it's a little bit like making rock candy. So I don't know how many of you as kids made rock candy, but you basically take water, you heat it up, dissolve a bunch of sugar, and then you drop a little crystal on the end of the string. And if it's super saturated, the crystal pops up and it goes. If you were too early, it melts. Right? So you have to get the water a little bit super saturated, and then if you pull the trigger at the right time, it just goes. And it's a slow roller camera, but it went. It took a while. So Eric I got to know over a while, because Eric was he and I had co-invested in Tango Video. And I don't know if you guys remember that. That was like a breakaway application when the iPhone first came out. And by the way, Tango just did a $50 million cash distribution last hour. They just declared one. Yeah, and they did a tender offer at $995 million last fall. So it's alive. It's kind of like a non-porn OnlyFans. So it generates a lot of money. Anyway, so I think it's been a cash story, but not over an IPO. But so Eric and I had funded a little bit of money to Tango, and I had started right around that time also a data science company. So we had built a platform for machine learning in the cloud, which is called Treasure Data. And Eric had put 50K into Treasure Data. But before that, I was explaining to him why the cloud was going to be really important. Because he had been one of the first 4 people at WebEx, And then WebEx got acquired by Cisco. It was a client-server architecture. And he was just last man standing because everybody else left and he was running it. So it was this business inside Cisco. And I think he was just so heads down. He was working on some ideas, but never had a chance to put them in practice. And I was telling him, I said, Eric, everything I'm doing now, cloud mobile. And he described to me, he said, yeah, someday somebody's going to build something like that, cloud mobile, and it's going to kill me at WebEx. And I hadn't thought of video conferencing as that kind of thing. And I said, really? Why? Like, why video conferencing? And he said, well, my architecture's gotten so complicated. He said, I have 13 different software teams to make this product. 13? Why don't you have just one? What? 13 teams? What do 13 teams do? And he said, well, when you come to webex.com, I have to be able to tell, are you a Mac, or are you a PC, or are you Linux or something else? Are you on Windows Vista, Windows which, Safari what? Which browser? So there's 13 different WebExes. And then they all connect when you make a call to one server. And then I have to figure out which one is the crappiest computer or browser or oldest operating system and derate everybody to that. Otherwise, that person can't see. Like, what? Are you kidding me? That's how WebEx works? I'm like, wow, that sounds like a piece of shit. I'm like, why are you even doing that? And he said, it's kind of gets simpler, but I just, we're running the business. And I said, well, you could probably build that, and he said, yeah, maybe. I said, well, think about it, And so a few weeks later, he called me and he said, hey, Bill, you want to go out for a coffee? And I said, are you starting a company? And he said, yeah, I think so. Oh, count me in. I'll write a check. So that's what got the ball rolling on Zoom. Yeah, and then it just, we aggregated a bunch of investors. And the first seed was actually pretty easy. But after that, I just couldn't believe how hard it was to raise money, because at the time he was competing, of course, with Skype that had gotten bought by Microsoft, and Hangouts was getting traction. It was free. WebEx owned the corporate market. GoToMeeting was pretty big. There were a couple others too. And so, many of my venture friends, none of the venture firms would touch it. And the other thing that had happened, every other major venture firm had already put money into a bunch of companies that were dying. So like when they're Blue Gene Networks or all these, like Blue Gene raised $140 million. It was like a $10 million business or something. So everybody was kind of conflicted out. And so we just kept running out of money. And people would tell me, the regular venture goes, Microsoft and Google have infinite cash flow and their products are free. Don't you get it? And I was like, well, and there's actually there's an Instagram post. There was an email I sent the time that when Zoom finally went public. We were at the IPO dinner in New York, and Jerry Yang had funded me in Trigger Data, so he did come in eventually, and a bunch of other people from that crowd. But Jerry Yang's team, we were at dinner the night of the IPO, and a guy named Nick Adams, he said to me, he said, yeah, just last week we were having a partners meeting, we pulled up your email and we were all laughing. I said, what email? And he sent it back to me right at the table. He said, this was the email that got us to invest. And I was like, and I looked at it, and it's on my Instagram somewhere from right around the IPO. But it was so funny because I had sent them a deck to look at Zoom. It wasn't called Zoom at the time, but it was called SASB. Okay, so I got him to look at it, so we had launched the product, gotten Walt Mossberg to cover it. There were, I think, 20,000 downloads off that article, which is kind of round here. We were surprised how little it was. 10,000 people opened it. 50% only used it once and never came back. And so Nick writes me back saying, Bill, the engagement numbers look horrible. Why should we even look at this? And I think it was Jerry that looked at it as like, Nick, you take care of this. Bill's a friend. I'm not telling him no. You tell him no. And so I wrote this 4-page email describing everything, cloud, mobile, what the revenue could look like, and it all came true. And I look back at that tone, and I was like, man, all or what? And I didn't know that I would, but it all happened. And this was, by the people think of Zoom as a COVID company, it was public the year before COVID. So it had already gone public in 2018 before the COVID ramp, and it was a very solid business. That year was a $300 million business, 83% gross margins, 30% operating, growing at 50% a year. That went to 100% a year for 2 years, but but that's how it happened.
So there seems to be a common theme, like you find new markets, realizing that it can be the next thing. So what do you think now is a market that you're very interested in and you see a huge potential for? I mean, AI is on top of everyone's minds, but specifically what area?
Well, there's a couple areas. So technology. And people that know me well and invest me will hear this. I'll be repeating myself. So all I'm really looking to do is solve a wide problem, lower the friction. So I say solve the problem. Lower friction, replicate scale. Lower friction, replicate scale. Lower friction, replicate scale. If you do that in a large market and you do it with good margins, you're going to be okay. And so I'm looking for areas of great inefficiency that have some problems that hopefully aren't tremendously hard to solve. But if you can break through and make something that's very repeatable and then build the back end so that if and when it goes, because you saw how Zoom, I couldn't believe the ability, when COVID hit, Zoom's back end had been designed for, at the time, about 60 million meetings a day, which sounds like a lot, but that would have been December, I think 2019. By January or February 2020, it was 200. And then by February, it was 300 million. And then by the next month, it was 600 million meetings a day. And this was at a time when you couldn't get on airplanes. So they're trying to build out infrastructure and nobody can get on a plane. But they did get on planes. They drove some places too. And luckily, Larry Ellison in Oracle, came through and built some stuff here too. But but you need to be able to ramp when it matters. And so I think one of the areas that I think has to get fixed is healthcare. So healthcare today is 18% of GDP. So almost one out of every $5 you spend is healthcare related costs. And the entire system is pretty broken. If you really look at the various layers, incentive systems, how businesses now, my sister's a doctor. She went through the HMO wave. She's got private practice, then all the private practices got bought up and turned into businesses. And now she gets, before she moved off to other parts because she didn't want to do this anymore, before she got forced into counting the number of patients per day and how many procedures she could prescribe to make margin, which is the way the operation runs, right? And then all goes to the insurers. It's just the whole system floated and it's basically bankrupt, right? So with the Medicare, Medicaid. So unless that gets fixed, unless our whole country gets fixed, the whole budgeting system for this country is messed up. So it's one of the big things that's got to get fixed. So I think data science, AI, machine learning, they're all, to me, the same thing. That's something that I think will produce extraordinarily large outcomes in probably 8 or 10 years. But the path to getting there is going to be complex and it's very slow. And there's a lot of regulatory stuff that doesn't appear in things like Zoom and Canva around HIPAA and data privacy. But I think there's some solutions there that I know will produce companies that are worth tens of billions of dollars.
So another sector you're very well known for is crypto, a free sector with that. Can you talk a little bit about what brought you into Bitcoin or crypto in the beginning, and also some new projects working on Chain Monkey and others?
Yeah, so this is also a wacko story. So Philip Rosedale, and I know some people here are working with him on stuff. Philip Rosedale is an old friend of mine. We used to snowboard together. And Philip had came to me, he had been the CTO of Real Networks, which many of you don't even know because you're not old enough. He was the CTO of Real and the chief scientist of Real, and Bernd Rode, who launched my kite, he was on the board of a company that we call 8x8. I was on the board of 8x8 for 10 years or something. So Bernd kept telling me, there's this guy you gotta meet. He's wacko, he's an interesting guy. So I meet Philip, and Philip one day says, I'm quitting Real and I'm gonna start a company. And I was like, well, what are you gonna do? He goes, would you know that Neil Stephenson novel? They said, what was it called?
Snow Crash?
Snow Crash. I'm going to build Snow Crash in real life. I was like, what does that mean? And I hadn't read Snow Crash yet. And so if you read Snow Crash, it's a fascinating, it's like a sci-fi novel where the main character basically, and this is before laptops really existed, you flip open a laptop, enter the screen, he's got a digital avatar, so it's like your second life, and goes through all these worlds, and you have a ninja sword, and get fights, and if you get killed, you time out, and you're out of the world for a while. Anyway, and in the physical person and the avatar, they become so bonded that at one point the avatar gets killed and the person dies. And it's a crazy novel, but it describes a lot of what unfolded in the age of the internet, like a digital train that went by digital billboards that collected a lot of eyeballs, stuff like that terms that became pervasive 10 years or 5 or 10 years later. Anyway, so I'm like, wow, that sounds pretty hard, Phil. Like the graphics cards are not ready for that yet. So we were kicking around a bunch of ways to do that, and then he finally launches it. And if you remember the early version of Second Life, you build this digital avatar, and you kind of walk around, hit the space bar and fly, and that was it. And there wasn't much to do. So we were sitting outside of a bar in San Francisco, if you remember, a place called the Paragon down in the marina. Yeah, so we were sitting outside at the thing after it closed one day, and I said to Philip, Philip, we got to give people something to do. I said, think about Las Vegas. What existed before Las Vegas? There was just sand. There was nothing there. And now there's like a city. What makes it go? I said, you could take one poker chip and make everybody in Second Life sit in a circle, make them pass it to the right once, like 1 million times a year, everybody make $1 million a year. And then as the chip's flying around, you peel it off and you build a resort and a hotel, and you basically have an economy. Let's make an economy. So he was already thinking about this, but that and many other conversations led to the launch of the Linden Dollar in 2002 or 3. And by 2006, there was somebody that ended up on the cover of Business Week because she made $1 million that year doing work in Second Life and converting Linden dollars into US dollars on the Lindex exchange. And there was another exchange at that time run by a kid named Brock Pierce. And so Brock, and we had conversations, like, maybe we should make it illegal to use that exchange. Maybe we should cut it off. Maybe we should acquire it. But they just let it go. And then Philip launched the Index to compete. But I think it was that predisposition and watching that happen that when the Bitcoin white paper came out, it got sent to me. And then somewhere around on Thanksgiving weekend, and my daughter's here, by the way, she knows, it's always a holiday, like 4th of July, Thanksgiving. I build things. So I built like little projects, light up some LEDs, do this and whatever. And so that weekend, Thanksgiving 2010, I downloaded a bunch of the software and I lit up a mic. And then a lot of things changed. So that led me later to deciding that it was cheaper so then I started mining. And then I started looking at all these mining ASICs and gear, and I didn't like any of them, but I ended up paying personally for a chip that was a really cool design by the company that became Victor. So we ended up, so that was just mind-blowing. So we deployed this, we built this silicon and then started building data centers. And by the way, I had a data center company. So we started building these data centers, and we built data centers in Iceland, Finland, Norway, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Canada, and more recently, we carved parts of those out. So the Canadian operation, our public company, had 8. Cipher Mining came out of that. But so they were around a lot of our kiteboarding. I taught them all the kiteboard. So we would basically travel around the world doing Bitcoin shit and kiteboard. It was very fun. So that led to, and then Vitalik asked me, Vitalik asked everybody to fund him in 2014, and I passed. because I was working on a SaaS infrastructure with the team. I wanted them to build a SaaS application layer on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. And we had this technique for merge mining data into the Bitcoin blocks. And when Vitalik pitched, I was like, yeah, the kid's onto something, but I'm going to have it built. And somehow our project, we pointed at enterprise, we were too late. A year and a half later, Ethereum launches, and it first went down, but then it took off. And then I realized it's going to work. And so I made a move to fund a bunch of Ethereum projects. I also knew at the time that this area was going to be super controversial from a regulatory standpoint. I just knew that the whole time. So I didn't want to fund companies here. So I funded Dapper Labs in Canada with CryptoKitties, Power Ledger in Australia. And I did one here because I figured I'd be under the air cover of other people. So with Joe Rubin and Mike Novogratz, we funded Fluidity that launched the first peer-to-peer DEX. And then after that, I kind of quiet because I just don't want to be in the controversial space, except for On-Chain Monkey, which you see the little hats over there. That's a cool project because I wanted to have the economic churn of all this crypto stuff do some real good in this world. And so how MetaGood started, which makes the On-Chain Monkey collection. When I funded Dapper Labs, I asked them, I was about to throw a deal with Richard Branson, or a thing with Richard Branson. So I wanted them to make me a cryptocurrency asset on the CryptoKitties thing that I could auction off at an ocean conservation thing, which is kind of a weird thing because cats, ocean, how do you put that together? So there is something called Hanu Kitty. So they came up with a cat with a turtle shell. Yeah. And we sold that for I think $50,000 and gave the money to Captain Paul Watson, and I convinced him to park the ship off of the coast of Antigua, or he was going to do this anyway. He had this thing called Operation Gyro. So we funded Operation Gyro, which had his guys walking the beaches 24/7 for the entire turtle season, so that all little babies could get off on the ocean and the big ones didn't get eaten. And so that then stuck in my head for a couple of years, and I thought, make it low friction, replicable, scalable. Let's turn it into something where we have a set of digital assets that as they trade, you can peel off some of the commission, and that's now turned into a DAO. You'll hear more about it from Amanda in a bit. But we have a DAO that I think is several $1 million. And a couple Thanksgivings ago, you may have heard some news about Afghan girl, whose name is Sharbat Gula, who was the bright green-eyed girl on the cover of National Geographic. When America pulled out of Afghanistan, anybody with ties to the West was in danger. So we teamed up with another organization called Future Brilliance, and we funded the evacuation of Sharbat Gula and her entire family to Italy with proceeds from this crypto thing. So I think, there's many, that DAO's funded a lot. It's funded the rehab of skate parks in Brazil and a bunch of other cool stuff. But I think there's ways to combine technology with the modern, just modern technology with needs that can do things that we couldn't have ever thought of before.
Well, thank you so much for today. It's an honor to have you here.